What's up, guys? Again, this week we're going to be talking about New Age practices. We're going to be talking to Marcia Montenegro about things like astrology, tarot cards, Christian yoga, and so much more. Everything New Age. Welcome to the Youth Apologetics Training Podcast. So welcome back. Guys, again, today we're going to continue where we left off last week. So guys, we're going to be talking to Marcia Montenegro, her ministry, Christian Answers for the New Age, her website, christiananswersforthenewage.org. And we're going to be talking about many different subjects that we were not able to cover last week. Interestingly enough, we thought we were going to just do one more part, but when we recorded this podcast, it ended up being almost 2 hours long. So there's actually going to be a part 2, which is today, and then next week we're going to have a part 3 talking about New Age practices and, how they are practiced from within the New Age and how many of these practices have somehow made it into the Christian church. So without further ado, Marcia, welcome back to the Youth Apologetics Training Podcast.
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it really, all my listeners loved the last show. I got a lot of feedback, and it was awesome. And so I'm looking forward to it as well. You know, I've got this background in the New Age. A lot of the things we're going to be talking about today I've monkeyed around with in the past and then repented of, just being a not so bright young man who was trying all these things of the world, trying to experience some type of extra power, extra influence on the world. It's not pleasing to the Lord. So, this is going to be interesting.
Yeah.
So in the last show, you talked about I think you said 7 years of involvement with astrology. First of all, is that correct? It was 7 years?
It was really more from the time I started studying until the time I stopped was really 10 years. The first 2 years were study and kind of practice, and then 8 years I was a certified professional astrologer.
And you talked about it a little bit. Let's jump in a little bit deeper. So exactly what is astrology? How does it supposedly work? How do they put together these birth charts? And is it even accurate? Can it be accurate? Or is it more like you're just rolling the dice and coming up with almost like a vague description that tickles the ears of the person that gets this little description supposedly of their character, something that complements them in several different ways where they just want to believe it. They read it and they're like, yeah, that is totally me. Is it something along those lines, or how does it work?
Okay, well, part of what you said is true. Or what you said is partly it, that people want to believe it. It's definitely a big part of it. And when we speak of astrology, let me just clarify that we're not talking about astronomy, which is the scientific study of space and the heavenly bodies. So there is astronomy, and then astrology is looking at these planets and the sun and moon, but sees a meaning in them and in their position. So
what about cosmology? What about
Isn't that makeup? I think that's makeup.
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Okay. Oh, all right. So what the astrologer does is the astrologer is looking at the position of the planets at the time of your birth and the place of your birth. Okay, and that is, now there are other forms of astrology. You can do astrology for an event. So you could do an astrology for, I don't know, just any kind of event, the signing of an important document, let's say, the signing of a treaty. You would get the time it was signed and the date and place, and you could do a chart for that. I mean, there's a chart for the Constitution of the United States, the Declaration of Independence. I can't remember which, maybe both. You can do it for an event like 9/11. You could do a chart for, something good happening, a wedding, let's say. So those are also part of astrology, but the most common kind and the one most people think of is when the astrologer is doing a birth chart for a person, an individual, to give them advice, to tell them things about themselves. Now, this is different from horoscope columns in the newspaper, which I also want to say something about. But the astrology chart is actually very, very complicated, and there's so many options in it that when the astrologer is looking at this chart, there's a lot of different directions that he or she can go. So you can go off into one area of the chart that looks very significant, and you can spend a long time on that. You can, go around the chart and hit different points. You can jump to maybe 3 major areas. There's so many things in the chart because you've got all the planets, the sun and the moon. You've got them distributed in a circle, which is divided up into 12 areas, and these are called houses. And each house represents an area of life. And then you have the zodiac signs, which are around the chart, the outside of the chart, depending on the time of birth. So the planets are going to fall into certain houses and into certain zodiac signs. So right there, you've got the planet in a certain zodiac sign in a certain house to interpret. And then you have to look at the relationship between the planets. So planets opposite each other mean something. Planets near each other mean something. Planets 90 degrees from each other mean something. 45 degrees means something. It's there's a lot of stuff to interpret. Now, because of all these options, just by chance, some of these things are going to be true. Then you also have a client who wants to believe. The client, anybody who goes to see an astrologer, especially if they've paid for it, they tend to be somebody either who believes it or they're open to it. And so they're going to want to think that the astrologer is really giving them accurate information. So they will tend to remember what's accurate and forget what isn't accurate. Or if something even isn't accurate, they may be able to think of it in a way that makes it accurate. So that's another way that it can seem very accurate. Another thing that happens is that the astrologer, even if they don't know anything about the person, in order to do the person's chart, they have to know their age. That's one thing the astrologer absolutely has to know. And if you know a person's age, you just, even without trying, you kind of know general life events that might be going on. You know someone in their 20s who isn't married, maybe they're looking for someone to marry. Someone in their 40s who's married may have marriage problems. Someone else may be in a job situation. So there's certain life events that go on that I think the astrologer just instinctively knows and kind of uses that when he or she is interpreting the chart. That will make the chart seem a little more accurate for the person. So you have those things going on. You have coincidence, the desire to believe, the client's desire to believe, the client's selective memory, general life circumstances at certain ages, and whether the person's married or unmarried, that will also play into it, whether it's a man or a woman. And then you also have something else going on, and this is the part that's really the evil part, which is that astrologers have spirit guides, just like all psychics and tarot card readers, mediums, everyone who does any form of divination or spirit contact has spirit guides. And the spirit guides, the astrologer and psychic and medium believe the spirit guides are benevolent. However, these spirit guides, which is something I did not know till after I became a Christian, these spirit guides are fallen angels. And they are able to somehow give information to the astrologer, because I know many times when I was reading a chart, there would be something that would come into my mind. Sometimes it was a word, sometimes it was just an impression or a picture of something, or I would just know. I would just feel like I suddenly knew a fact about the person. And I would say it, I would share it with the client, and they would be amazed that I knew that. Now, it was sort of triggered by the chart, but it wasn't actually something you could interpret from the chart all the time. Sometimes it was. So there's like a demonic guidance going on. And that is why sometimes the information is very accurate. And it's accurate enough that people who go to astrologers will usually continue to go. I mean, I had people who came to me for the first time, and then they would come back for an update, usually once a year. Sometimes they would want to come sooner. So I would update their chart. I would look at where the planets were at that point in relationship to the birth chart. And you can do a reading that's called transits, which is what influences are going on now, what's being triggered in your chart by the present positions of the planets. So you do an update. You also do something else called a progress chart, which is this mathematical thing of a day equaling a year. And so you can do a progress chart. So you have clients coming back every year for these updates. This is why I never had to advertise, because once I had a certain number of clients, they would keep coming back, plus they told other people. So it was almost all word of mouth, references from people. And I had a continuous, continual stream of clients. And they would feel it was accurate. I mean, I was told this over and over again. You're so accurate. You know more about me than my therapist. I had people tell me that. They could also come, like a mother would maybe want me to do charts of her children. So I would do a chart of their child or children, their husband. Then I could also do a relationship chart. So I can do a chart of, you could take a mother-child, take both of their charts, and you make a composite, which is a third chart, and that's a chart of the relationship. Or, of course, the most popular composite charts were people in romantic relationships or in marriage. And so you would combine their two charts, and then you have a third chart. You also can compare them. You can compare them and combine them, so there are two ways to do it. So you see with all these different techniques and things of a person looking at their life and their relationships, that just the information that comes out from all that, it impresses the clients. And because so much of it seems to be true, or actually is true. Now, it's not because astrology is valid. And I want to make that clear. Astrology, there's no validity to the fact that, Venus represents relationships, and Mars represents the ego, and Neptune represents deception and film and photography, and, Jupiter represents growth, expansion, and higher education. These are some of the meanings of the planets. And, that's not true. Jupiter doesn't mean anything. It's a planet. And, the facts of Jupiter are the scientific facts and the fact that God created it. And beyond that, there's no meaning. In mythology, of course, there's meaning. But, that's in mythology. And most people don't take that seriously. But in astrology, in your chart, see, it has all this meaning. That actually is not true. So what's going on here also is the fact that, for example, the 12 zodiac signs, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, etc., all relate to human nature. Everything you can say about those 12 signs are going to relate to human nature, to something in a person's life. The 12 areas of the chart, the 12 houses, relate to 12 areas of your life. The self, relationships, possessions, children, romance, travel, career, etc. So most people have things going on in their life that are going to coincide with those 12 houses and with the 12 zodiac signs. So it's just kind of it's sort of statistically inevitable that as you discuss these things in the chart, that a lot of these things are going to hit. They're going to relate to something the person sees in their life or they're going through. So that is my best explanation. I definitely emphasize the demonic element here for the real specific stuff that tends to be accurate, and maybe even some of the less specific stuff. So people who feel that, Aries really applies to me, I'm really like an Aries, every time I read a description of Aries, that's really me. Well, of course, what you're reading and you're identifying with the things about Aries that are true. But one thing I did know, and I even knew this as an astrologer, is that nobody fit their sun sign perfectly. I mean, nobody. You couldn't, if you list all of the traits of Aries or Leo or whatever, nobody fits all of those. And what's more is that they have many traits that come from the other signs. So that's if you're looking at just your zodiac sign. And that's what you do when you look at a horoscope column. A horoscope column is based mainly on the movement of the moon, which changes signs every 2.5 days. So somebody writing a horoscope column is looking at where the moon is or where it's going to be for the day they're writing the column in relation to the zodiac signs. So they're saying, okay, the moon, I'm writing this column that's going to appear in 3 days, and the moon will be in Virgo. And okay, now what is that going to mean to an Aries person? And then they also may look at, okay, where's Mars? Because Mars rules Aries. And where's Mars in relation to the moon in Virgo, and how does that fit? So then you write something based on that. So, and you can come up with different scenarios so that, it'll be true for 2 or 3 days because the moon will be in that sign for 2 to 3 days. So you can kind of figure out things that way and write it based on that. And then, of course, it's usually very short and general. So it basically is meaningless because you have especially a daily horoscope, you have 12 signs, and everybody in the world is one of those 12 signs. And does anyone really believe that what's written there is going to apply to everybody? So it says for tomorrow, for Gemini, be work quietly at work and don't draw attention to yourself. It's better to kind of keep a low profile. All right, does anyone really believe, everyone who's a Gemini, that's going to apply to everybody in the world is a Gemini? If you really think it through logically, you have to say no, of course not. And maybe that's good advice for a lot of people, and maybe a lot of Geminis who read it, maybe that's going to happen to be good advice for them. So they'll follow it. But if they don't follow it, if they follow it and things work out good, they'll think, oh, that was good advice, So there's just so many different ways that this stuff can be appealing and seem to work, and people love to hear about themselves. So especially someone who goes to an astrologer, they're getting a lot of in-depth information. This is a lot more than the little daily thing in the newspaper. So you're getting all this information about your childhood, your relationships, your talents, your job issues, Past life, you can look at the past life in the chart. Yeah, allegedly. I am not saying that you can. Please, I hope people understand I'm speaking as an astrologer would speak. So since I was one, this is something I'm really super familiar with. I also taught astrology for over 5 years. So I actually taught different levels of it, beginning, intermediate, and advanced. So it's something I'm really familiar with. And, I totally believed in it. I didn't think I was making stuff up or conning people. I was completely on board with it, as were all my friends who were astrologers. And you can really get yourself convinced of things. And when you start thinking this way, you filter things through astrology. So things happen and you think, oh, I know why this is happening. It's because Mercury's retrograde. Or I know why this is happening. It's because Neptune has entered my 10th house. And that's why such and such is happening at my workplace. So you interpret things through what you know about the planets and your chart. And the clients can do that too once they get the information from you, which is usually recorded. I always recorded it at that time on a cassette tape, which I gave to the client. So then they could listen to it whenever they wanted, and they got a copy of their chart because no one could remember. You can't remember everything that's said in a session. So anyway, that's pretty much how I explain astrology.
Okay. Yeah, and it's interesting too. Just for a laugh, one day I went on to astrology.com, and first of all, I found that there was so many different types of astrology that contradicted each other. There were so many different flavors, but I went ahead and picked the most popular one, and then I randomly picked a horoscope without looking, and then read it, and this was for that day after the day was done. And I read it and I'm laughing because I'm like, yeah, I could make that fit my day. I could definitely, it was elastic enough that I could fit it around my day. And then I read what sign it was for, and it was definitely not the sign that supposedly I'm in. But for a podcast in the past, just for a laugh, I went ahead and picked one of the signs. I can't remember which one it was. Maybe it was Cancer or Taurus or whatever. And then I deliberately told the audience that it was a different sign. And then I read it. And then I was like, so now some of you just gasped as you realized that this sign just totally read your mail. This is you. But I lied. This is actually a different sign. and then I said, I'm not even going to tell you guys which sign it is because honestly, I don't want any of you guys to get caught up in this nonsense. But just know, they use so much flattering language that it doesn't matter what sign you are. When you hear it, you're like, oh, that just makes my spirit soar. It just resonates. That is so me. But that's true. But in this stuff, I know that astrology does find its way within the church at times. Is there a Christian spin that's put on astrology when it's practiced within the church?
Well, yes, and I think that there's two answers to that. One is there are people who are astrologers who call themselves Christians and who I think really believe they're Christians, and they are totally think astrology is compatible with Christianity. Of course it isn't. It's a form of divination, and it is divination is condemned, especially in the Old Testament, but it's also condemned in a few places in the New Testament, especially Acts 16, when you have Paul and Barnabas, I think it's Barnabas, come upon the fortune teller. It's Paul and somebody come upon the fortune teller who has a spirit of divination. And the Old Testament has a lot of condemnation of divination, which would include astrology, reading cards, numerology, being a psychic, anything where you're reading a hidden meaning in something, or you're getting information via an occult supernatural means, like through spirit contact. So astrology also was condemned explicitly in Isaiah 47, especially the last few verses. The whole chapter, Isaiah 47, is God's condemnation of Babylon. And he rebukes them for their sorceries and basically their occult arts, and how they are seeking information through those means. And then towards the end, he talks about those who prognosticate month by month, which is the astrologers. And that, maybe they say things that are good, but, in the end, this is not going to save you. There's a very strong condemnation of astrology. The word astrology is a modern word, so it didn't exist in the Hebrew, so there's no Hebrew word for astrology. But the Hebrew will use phrases that refer to it, like dividing up the skies and monthly prognostication and looking towards, the hosts of heaven. So there's different references. The references to astrology are different than using the word astrology, but it's clear that's what is being done in astrology. Is probably astrology could be the most ancient occult art, possibly. It might be the oldest one, and or definitely one of the oldest. And so it's very clear there's no way astrology can be okay with God, because you're reading hidden meanings into things, and you're looking to creation for an answer. You're not looking to the Creator. So there's that kind of thing going on where, people told me they went to an astrologer and, she had a cross on the wall and she prayed before she did the chart. So they thought that it was okay. And then there's the type of astrology in the church that they don't use the word astrology for it. They usually call it gospel in the stars. And this is an interpretation of the zodiac signs are tied in supposedly to the gospel story. So Virgo is the Virgin, Mary, and Leo is the line of Judah, etc. And the problem with this, there's several problems with it. But one of them is there's absolutely no biblical support for this. That's a pretty major one. And number two, you've got the gospel being given through creation. Now, creation, as Romans 1 tells us, is a witness to the fact there is a creator. Creation witnesses to the existence of a creator. And God says in Romans 1 that because of that, no man is without excuse. In other words, no one can say there is no evidence for a creator. God says you can't say that because creation itself is evidence for a creator. So everyone is accountable for knowing there's a God. It's not about salvation. It's about being accountable. That's how Romans 1 starts. It starts off about everybody being accountable. And so you're not going to get the gospel in general revelation. You get the gospel. The news about Jesus Christ is specific, is special revelation. It came, of course, when Jesus incarnated and was on earth, and that was definitely a special revelation. And we have God's Word now, which is the special revelation, which gives us this specific information. And it's not through looking. You can't get the gospel by looking at the planets. It's just not there. There's other problems with this. Another problem with it is that they use the Greek or the Roman names for the planets to connect them to Jesus, but those names are not universal. For example, Chinese astrology is a whole different system. It's not even like Western astrology. It's completely different. Doesn't use Aries, Taurus, Gemini, etc. Nor does Native American astrology. And I don't even know what forms of astrology may exist in Africa, but I'm sure they don't use Aries, Taurus, Gemini, in the indigenous peoples, and probably not anywhere else either. So it's not universal. Those just came from Western astrology via Greece and Rome. And so that's another problem. Another problem is that this Gospel in the Stars business, which E.W. Bollinger had Witness in the Stars or Witness to the
Mm-hmm.
Stars, formulated this, is that I think the claim is made, at least by some people who support this view, that this information was given to Adam and Eve in the garden. And then it was lost, and in the fall, and then eventually Satan took it and perverted it, and made it into astrology as we know it today, which is the quote-unquote bad form of astrology. But there really originally was a good form, which was this Gospel in the Stars business. And since Satan corrupts everything, then, that sort of validates it. Well, astrology is just a corrupt form of something God did for us. But that isn't true for everything. You don't look at things that are corrupt and evil that God condemns and say, well, there really originally was a good form of this, unless there's evidence for it. So there isn't any evidence for any quote-unquote good form of astrology, for Witness in the Stars, for Gospel in the Stars, etc. Also, a lot of the information Bollinger used about the stars and the planets and the names for them that he supposedly got historically have been refuted and invalidated. So his information isn't even accurate. So all of this to say, there is absolutely no support for the Gospel in the Stars view. And as Christians, we should not be looking or pointing people to creation for information, and especially to say there's a hidden meaning, that there's some kind of hidden meaning, in Leo, and there's a hidden meaning in Virgo that connect to Jesus. Then you're getting into the occult. As soon as you start looking for a hidden meaning that has no support for that meaning, you've crossed the line there. So that's my my take on that. And of course, I was asked about that very early on as a Christian. When people found out I had been an astrologer, often that's the first question that I was asked was, what do you think of the Gospel in the Stars? And actually, I have a little story, real short story on that. When I had just become a Christian, I was brand new. I'd been a Christian for like 4 days. I went to a bookstore, and I went to the religious section. And then they had a section that they called Christian. And this was a secular bookstore. And I was hungry, for information. This was all new to me. I wanted to see what was out there. And I'm looking at these books in the Christian section, and they had a Gospel in the Stars book. And I picked it up. It caught my attention. And I thought, what is this? I had never heard of it. And I started reading through it. And it was giving this information about the gospel being in the planets and the zodiac signs, the stars. And I was reading, and I was like, what? This is like astrology. This is really, really creepy. And I was totally creeped out by it. It really upset me. I put the book back, and then I just willed myself to forget about it, because I didn't even want to think that existed. I didn't even want to think that somebody could believe that was true. And of course, I wasn't able to will it out of my life because within a few years, people were asking me about it and debating me on it. And oh my goodness, it became quite a hardship dealing with that topic, because people who believe in it are die-hard believers. And I don't mind people asking. A lot of people ask because they're curious, and I'm happy to give my view. But I don't argue with the die-hard believers anymore, because there's no point in it, really.
Right. I remember when I was a new Christian, I did read through that book, E.W. Bollinger's Gospel in the Stars. Or no, A Witness in the Stars, I think is what it was.
Yeah.
And, it resonated with me, and I ate it up, and I still have a copy of it, and it's all fallen apart and highlighted up. I was so excited about it. But then, things started coming to the forefront the more I studied that just didn't quite add up, and I still wanted it to be true, but eventually I'm like, no, if I got to be honest with my faith, there's just a little bit too much hokiness going on here. And boy, I would not use that as a witnessing tool at all. Now, there's just too many ways to poke holes in it. It's just not accurate. It's just not accurate. And you're right. I guess it could lend credibility to astrology, and that's kind of leading people down a bad path as well. So, okay. So changing gears, this ought to be fun. What is your opinion on Christian yoga?
Yeah, this is a big question. That, of course, what is my opinion on yoga has been one of my number one questions for many years, and now Christian yoga, now that it exists, which it didn't really exist that much until, I guess, really it started over 10 years ago, but people didn't really start hearing about it till maybe within, especially the past 5 years, and now I am asked about that. By the way, I do have an article on Christian yoga on my website. I have 5 articles on yoga, and one of them is on Christian yoga. I think that that's an oxymoron because of what yoga means. Yoga comes from a Sanskrit word which means to yoke. It's very much a part of the system of Hinduism, and it has to do with preparing yourself spiritually. Now, I should probably stop here and clarify this. When you ask me about Christian yoga, and when people ask about yoga, they're usually thinking of the yoga most popular in this country, which is the one where you do various positions and various poses. And that is actually called Hatha Yoga, Hatha. And Hatha means sun and moon. And the reason that it's called Hatha is because the sun and moon represent the opposite forces or energies in your body that you are harmonizing through the physical postures of yoga and through the breathing, etc. So it's a very classic kind of Eastern occult worldview where you've got opposites that have to be harmonized. And so that's what Hatha means. It means sun-moon. So it's really sun-moon yoga. And it is only one form of yoga. There's several forms of yoga, and traditionally I think there were mainly 4 major areas, and it's become more now since then. But the Hatha Yoga is disciplining your body and preparing your body for the more advanced meditative stages of Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga, R-A-J-A, is the yoga of meditation. And by disciplining your body in Hatha Yoga and through the breathing, etc., you're preparing yourself for deeper levels of meditation. In other words, Hatha Yoga is not supposed to be an end in itself. It's supposed to continue on into other forms of yoga. Also, the postures often honor various Hindu gods, and the breathing that's done is called pranayama. And this is a belief in the prana means breath, but it doesn't mean your breath. It means the divine breath of the universe. So when you do the breathing exercises, it is actually considered a spiritual exercise and a spiritual cleansing where you are breathing a certain way. This energy from prana goes into you and does various things to your body and your what they call the subtle body, which is the invisible body, and that would include things like the chakras, and the chakras, which probably most people have heard about by now because yoga's become so popular. And also chakras are often imported into many alternative healing modalities. So most people now have heard the word. And the chakras are supposedly they're invisible wheels of energy going from the bottom of the spine up to the top of the head. The chakras are there partly to help the kundalini, which is an energy at the base of the spine, allegedly, an invisible energy coiled like a serpent, and kundalini means the coiled one. And so part of the whole process is that the kundalini needs to rise through the various chakras. And the positions in Hatha Yoga help prepare these chakras for the kundalini. So all of this is part of the Hatha Yoga, which I guess some people may call Hatha. I used to call it Hatha Yoga, and I realized it's really supposed to be pronounced Hatha Yoga, I think. So that's all part of this. It's a lot more complicated than people realize. It's not about exercise. The purpose of it is not to be more flexible or to be more limber or to have stronger muscles or whatever. The purpose of it is a spiritual purpose, and the discipline of the body is a preparation for advanced meditation. So it was never designed for exercise. And there is a spiritual component to yoga. And I do believe personally that doing it can open doors for things that you would prefer not to have in your life. Now, I'm not talking about necessarily being possessed, and I don't believe Christians can be possessed. Everyone always wants to jump to that right away. Or do you think someone, demon's going to possess you? As though that's the only thing that can happen. Usually the results of getting engaged in things like this are much more subtle, and they're so subtle the person doesn't realize it. They're doing, I'll give an example of someone who did Tai Chi for a while, and Tai Chi is a spiritual practice. It's very spiritual, and it has to do with energy and manipulating the energy, which is called Qi or Ki. Now, it's not Hindu, it's from Taoism, but the same principles apply. And that is, this person who was doing it gradually lost interest in church. She was a Christian. She lost interest in reading the Bible. She lost interest in prayer, and wasn't even aware that it was connected to doing the Tai Chi until I asked her, and I was asking her, do you still go to church? Well, I used to. Do you pray? Well, not like I used to. Do you read the Bible? No, not really, not anymore. And I said, well, when did all this stop? Well, it sort of stopped about 2 years ago. Well, that's when she was really getting into Tai Chi. So sometimes it's this, it's much more subtle, and you don't necessarily notice the effects. You don't necessarily notice it. And so I think that's one reason that makes it even more dangerous, is because we often don't notice when we're being affected by something in a negative way. And anything negative, not necessarily New Age, but just anything that we take a liking to or that we bring into our life, we don't notice how it's changing us, And this is true with getting involved in these kind of activities. So maybe down the road, somebody will say something to you, or the Lord, if you're a Christian, will bring it to your awareness. And we are talking about Christian yoga here, so I'm assuming just to make it easier to talk about that, we're talking about Christians doing yoga, or doing yoga that's called Christian yoga. So if you're doing some of the positions, you're not doing the breathing, you're not trying to follow any kind of process, Sometimes I'm asked, is it okay to do it if I'm just doing it for exercise? And I'm still a bit uncomfortable with it, but I think if you're not doing the pranayama, you're not really doing yoga. So you can't really say you're doing yoga.
Okay. Yeah, so if you're doing hatha yoga, that's a bad thing. If you're just breathing and stretching to get hatha, then that's probably not such a bad thing. Bad pun.
Well, it depends on what the it depends on what the breathing is. If you're doing the pranayama, if you're doing the breathing the way they instruct you to do it in yoga, that's not good.
Yeah.
Because it's not a physical thing. It's a spiritual thing. Now, I mean, if you're just looking at a book and you're looking at certain positions and you're doing them to stretch your muscles or whatever, and you're not doing anything else, you're not doing anything else that yoga would normally have you do, which usually would involve certain breathing things and maybe doing the positions a very specific way. I know, see, it's very hard to address the issue because it depends on what the person's doing and what's being told to them. And, that's why to me, it's just easier just to stay away from the whole thing. Why even try to go there? It's not like there's no other exercise in the world. Right. I mean, what in the world were people doing for exercise in 1941? I mean, what were Christians doing in 1961 for exercise? I mean, yoga was around, but pretty much I don't think Christians were into it in 1961 or 65 or even 75. Weren't there other forms of exercise? Isn't there something called swimming, bike riding, walking, aerobics, dancing? Now there are a lot of dance exercise videos you can get. I mean, you can... there's so many forms of exercise now, many, many more than we had 20 years ago. And so why does one have to do yoga? Well, I can tell you why. It's because it was marketed. It was marketed successfully so that it is associated with health, beauty, peace, and usually youth. Although not always, but the health, beauty, and peace, it's been so strongly associated with those three areas that I think people just think yoga or see yoga or hear something about a yoga class and they immediately want to do it because it's associated with those things, and it's especially associated with health. So, I see advertisements on TV that have nothing to do with yoga, but they'll show someone in a yoga class. And it's because it sells their product, even though it has nothing to do with the product. And they'll show someone doing yoga, and then they'll go, somewhere else, and then the ad will come on about, she'll go into her room, her house that just was painted this beautiful color in the living room. She just came from the yoga class, and then she sees this beautiful serene color. And so you have yoga and the serene color in her living room that makes her feel, good and calm and peaceful. And that's all from the yoga. So the yoga gets, I've seen it used to promote Marriott hotels, to promote wheat thins, to promote house paint. I didn't make that up. I've actually seen it used for that on TV.
Goodness.
So it's used for products that have absolutely nothing to do with yoga and don't necessarily even have anything to do with health.
That's interesting. That's marketing for you.
Yep, it is marketing.
All right, guys. Well, we will stop right here. Next week, we'll pick up exactly where we left off. There's still yet many more topics that we ended up covering in this conversation. So, if you want to know more about what Marcia is doing, her website, again, ChristianAnswersForTheNewAge.org. Just a wealth of information, a great place to check out what is going on from within the New Age movement from a Christian perspective. Check it out. And next week, we will pick up where we left off here today. And with that, I love you guys, and we'll see you next week.